Welcome to Roll Credits, where movie lovers get the trivia they didn't know they needed. This podcast was created with help from AI tools, so double-check any quotes before you drop trivia at your next movie night. Today, we're diving into The Pitt. Did you know many of the medical procedures in the show were designed with real consultants to be as accurate as possible? And before we get into it, drop a comment and let us know what movie or show we should cover next, old or new.
Yeah, so for this deep dive, we really dug into the set blueprints, interviews with the medical consultants, and tons of production notes. And honestly, what's wild to discover is that The Pitt isn't constructed like your standard medical drama at all.
Right. It's totally different.
Exactly. Architecturally, narratively, it actually operates much more like a 15-hour hostage situation.
Oh, man, that is the perfect way to frame it, especially when you look at the core premise,
Yeah.
right? For those of you who haven't caught it yet, the show follows the medical staff at the fictional Pittsburgh Trauma Medical Center. But the defining constraint of Season 1 is the timeline. The entire 15-episode arc covers exactly one 15-hour ER shift.
Right, so one episode equals exactly 1 hour of real time.
Exactly. Continuous time. There are no temporal leaps at all.
Which, I mean, that fundamentally alters the whole psychological contract with the viewer. In a standard TV show, time is it's super malleable.
Oh, absolutely.
Like a trauma patient arrives, the monitors flatline, and then we cut to a commercial break. And when we come back, it's 3 hours later, and the patient is perfectly stabilized in recovery.
Right. The viewer gets a break.
Yeah, you get a subconscious reprieve. But here, time is this immense physical weight. That narrative constraint completely removes the release valve.
I kept thinking of it like being locked on a high-speed roller coaster. You know that feeling when the lap bar clicks into place and the car just starts climbing?
Oh, yeah, the worst anxiety.
Yes. You can't just step away to catch your breath if it gets too intense. You are strapped in until the ride is over. Because the camera never follows these doctors home.
No, not at all.
We don't get scenes of them walking their dogs or, having a quiet coffee on a Sunday.
Yeah.
As the viewer, you are just trapped inside the fluorescent glare of the emergency room with them for 15 unbroken hours.
And that unbroken pacing, it forces the show to confront the reality of modern American healthcare, specifically what they call the crisis of waiting room medicine.
Okay, tell me more about that, because that was super interesting in the notes.
Yeah, well, in a fully functioning system, the ER is supposed to be a processing center, right? You stabilize the patient, and then you move them upstairs to an inpatient bed.
Right, you get them out of the ER.
Exactly. But if the hospital is at capacity, and there are literally no beds upstairs, patients just stay down there. They board in the ER, sometimes for days. And because the show operates in strict real time, you as the viewer actually see the exact same background patients lingering in the waiting room, or just parked on hallway gurneys across multiple episodes.
Yeah, I noticed that. You see a patient with a fractured arm in episode 2, and then by episode 8, they are still sitting in the exact same plastic chair.
Yep, just shifting their weight.
It builds this incredible amount of ambient anxiety for you as a viewer.
It really does. It's an agonizing visual representation of a systemic bottleneck. The doctors aren't just fighting pathology, they're fighting the architecture of an overcrowded system.
Right.
And you absorb that friction because you are forced to endure the weight right alongside them.
And because the camera never cuts away to some, B story outside the hospital,
Yeah.
actors have absolutely nowhere to hide.
No, they really don't.
Like they couldn't rely on clever editing to fake their medical expertise. The production realized super early on that the cast had to essentially become reflexive medical professionals.
Which is a huge ask for an actor.
Huge. But Noah Weil, who anchors the show, and he won an Emmy for his role as Dr. Rabinovich, by the way, he treated the audition process like he was casting for a combat unit.
Yeah, his mandate was that this production was going to function like theater in the round, incredibly fast-paced, highly technical, and you had to have a completely locked-in ensemble mentality.
And the dynamics behind the scenes reflect that entirely. Like, you have Taylor Dearden playing Dr. Mel King. Did you know she's actually Bryan Cranston's daughter?
Wait, really? I had no idea.
Yeah. But she specifically uses her mother's maiden name professionally because she wanted to bypass any perception of nepotism. She wanted to earn her space in that high-pressure environment purely on merit.
Oh, that's incredibly cool.
Right. And then you have Fiona Dourif playing Dr. McKay. She actually brought in her real-life father, Brad Dourif, the legendary character actor who voices Chucky.
Oh, yeah, I love him.
He guest stars as her character's dad. So the emotional shorthand they bring to the screen is just palpable. But to get this cast to actually look like seasoned trauma staff, they were put through what the crew literally called boot camp.
Yeah, I read about the boot camp. The goal there was highly ambitious. They had to compress the muscle memory of like 4 years of medical school and 4 years of an emergency residency into just a matter of days.
Which just sounds impossible.
It does. They ran drills on suturing, placing chest tubes, and managing airways using medical dummies and volunteers.
Okay, I was reading through the technical notes on their CPR training, and this completely blew my mind. I have to ask you about this.
Oh, the chest compressions.
Yeah. When you watch the cast perform CPR on screen, it looks incredibly violent. Like they are really throwing their bodies into it. I initially assumed they were just constantly breaking the ribs of the other actors.
Dude, how did they not break ribs?
Well, they actually learned a highly specific kinetic technique. Because, to perform effective CPR in reality, you have to compress an adult's sternum about 2 inches deep, which definitely breaks things.
Oh, almost always. It very often breaks ribs and cartilage. So to mimic that, without actually harming their co-stars, the actors learn to lock their elbows and hinge at the hips.
Okay.
They shift their core body weight forward so they visually look super heavy. But at the absolute last microsecond before impact, they engage their core muscles to act as a brake.
Oh, wow. So they pull the force back at the last second.
Exactly. It's this astonishing piece of physical choreography. They are pantomiming brutal force while maintaining complete physical control.
That is wild.
But, if we connect that training to the broader demands of acting, the ultimate goal wasn't just physical safety. It was actually about mitigating cognitive load.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about the mental bandwidth required to deliver a devastating, highly technical page of dialogue. If an actor is actively looking down, consciously thinking about how to untangle an IV line or hold a scalpel, their performance becomes really stiff.
Oh, right. Because they're in their own head about the prop.
Exactly. The medicine had to be drilled into their central nervous system until it just became a reflex. Only when the physical actions are automatic can the actor fully inhabit the emotional reality of the scene.
That makes the underlying tension on screen make so much more sense. Now, having a perfectly trained main cast handles the foreground, but the background of a hospital is a living, breathing organism.
Yeah, it never stops.
So to populate the visual periphery, the production brought in 7 board-certified, residency-trained doctors to work on set full-time as choreographers.
Which is huge.
And instead of hiring standard Hollywood extras to, walk back and forth holding clipboards, they hired real-world nurses and physician assistants as background actors.
Which solves a massive logistical problem, honestly. Real medical professionals possess this innate spatial awareness of a clinical setting.
Right, you don't have to direct them as much.
Exactly. You don't have to explain to an actual trauma nurse how to navigate around a gurney or how to authentically scan a vital monitor. They just bring their own kinetic vocabulary to the set.
But I do want to push back on one specific detail from the production notes, because to me, it seems borderline obsessive.
Which one?
They actually hired a retired charge nurse whose singular, dedicated job was to track the background patients who were boarding in the hallways over the 15 episodes.
Oh, the IV bag guy?
Yes. He had to mathematically ensure that the background IV bags drained by exactly 100 cc every single hour. He tracked their specific meal trays, and he ensured they received respiratory breathing treatments at the correct intervals.
Yeah.
I mean, I get making the main characters authentic, but isn't paying a dedicated staff member just to monitor the fluid levels of out-of-focus background IV bags total overkill for a TV show?
I completely understand why it sounds like overkill. I really do. But it actually taps into how the human brain processes visual information.
Okay, how so?
It's about establishing a subconscious reality. You, as the viewer, you aren't actively focusing on a blurry IV bag hanging in the background of a shot, right?
Right, I'm looking at the actors.
But your brain acts as a passive sponge. If that bag is completely full in hour 3, and then it's still completely full in hour 9, your brain detects a static environment. It registers that something in this world is artificial.
Oh, I see. It's like the audio hum of a refrigerator in your kitchen.
Yes, exactly.
You never consciously listen to it, but the absolute second the power goes out and the hum stops, your brain instantly panics because the environmental baseline just shifted.
That is a perfect analogy. The accurately draining IV bags provide a visual hum. By meticulously tracking those fluid levels, the meal rotations, the shifting fatigue in the background, the production builds this dense, inescapable atmosphere.
So it creates a tension you feel, even if you can't articulate it.
Precisely. And from a cultural perspective,
Yeah.
that level of granular detail is honestly a profound love letter to the unseen, exhaustive labor of actual healthcare workers. It honors what charge nurses are managing minute by minute in wards everywhere.
That really grounds the drama in absolute reality. But I feel like that creates its own storytelling problem. With this obsessive forensic level of medical accuracy, how do they prevent the show from devolving into just a dry clinical documentary?
Well, the writers solved this by reverse engineering the medicine.
Reverse engineering.
Yeah, they start with the emotional narrative they want to tell, and then they hunt for the exact pathology that fits it. They prioritize the character's emotional trajectory and then utilize medical science as the crucible to test them.
Okay, that makes sense. The writer's room actually used 4 massive whiteboards to track the 15 continuous hours. They don't just pick a disease out of a hat.
No, it's super calculated.
Like the storyline with Javadi, the third-year medical student. That is the ultimate example of this. The writers wanted to explore a deeply specific emotional beat. Javadi being professionally and personally humiliated by her mother.
Right, who happens to be a hotshot surgeon visiting the ER.
Exactly. So to execute this, the writers built a case around a patient with severe appendicitis. The mother arrives, completely takes over, and starts aggressively questioning the students. She ultimately quotes a highly niche 2020 study from the New England Journal of Medicine to completely undermine and show up her daughter in front of her peers.
It perfectly establishes the mother's dominance using the precise language of their shared profession. It basically weaponizes medical literature as a tool of parental intimidation.
But then, to give Javadi her redemption arc later in the shift, the writers needed a medical case where a med student could legitimately outsmart a veteran surgeon.
Right, something tricky.
Yeah, I was looking through the case files they used, and they specifically chose to introduce a patient suffering from a black widow spider bite.
Oh, this is brilliant.
Right, because of the mechanism of the venom. Black widow venom triggers a massive release of neurotransmitters that causes the abdominal muscles to violently cramp and become entirely rigid.
And to a surgeon, a rigid abdomen is the absolute classic hallmark of peritonitis.
It's exactly a life-threatening internal infection that requires immediate surgery. There are actually documented real-world cases of patients being wheeled into operating rooms before someone spots the tiny puncture wound.
Wow.
So Javadi catches the subtle clue that her mother, with all her surgical tunnel vision, completely missed. The biology of the spider bite perfectly serves the emotional victory of the character.
It's just elegant screenwriting. And you see the exact same methodology applied to Dr. Moorhan's character, too.
Oh, with the skin cream.
Yes.
Ah.
She has a patient exhibiting severe paranoia and erratic behavior, which the rest of the exhausted staff immediately dismisses as a psychiatric break.
Right, they just want to move on.
But the narrative needed to highlight Mohan's relentless tenacity. So she keeps probing, analyzing the patient's daily habits, and she discovers the patient is actually suffering from heavy metal toxicity. Specifically, mercury poisoning absorbed systemically through an imported skin lightening cream.
That is so specific.
Right, but again, the physiological mechanism of the heavy metal crossing the blood-brain barrier and mimicking psychosis is used to validate Mohan's specific character trait of refusing to take the easy answer.
And the pacing of how these cases arrive in the ER creates this brutal emotional whiplash because the show doesn't neatly compartmentalize tone.
No, it's incredibly chaotic.
Like in one trauma bay, you have a professional children's clown who has suffered a severe trauma. When a patient is in hypovolemic shock, their peripheral veins collapse like deflated balloons.
Making it impossible to insert a standard 5E.
Right. So the doctors have to use an IO, an intraosseous needle. They literally take a specialized drill and bore directly into the shin bone to push fluids directly into the marrow cavity.
That's horrific.
They're performing this medieval-looking procedure on a fully awake, talking clown. It is visually terrifying but inherently absurd and funny.
Yeah, totally surreal.
And then, quite literally, on the other side of a curtain, a medical student is treating Ketty. A young man who suffered 90% total body surface area burns in a gas tank explosion. Over the course of the episode, the student has to slowly, devastatingly realize that the math of the burn means there is no medical miracle coming.
Yeah, Teddy's body simply cannot survive the fluid loss. He is going to die, and all they can offer is palliative comfort. That spatial proximity, the absolute absurdity of the clown separated only by a thin fabric curtain from the profound tragedy of the burn victim, that is the authentic geography of emergency medicine.
It really is.
And to capture those nuances accurately, that the research process had to be exhaustive. Looking through the notes, it's clear the writers weren't interested in making political statements or editorializing.
No, not at all.
Whether they were bringing in real-world Zoom consultants to understand the clinical protocols for trans youth care, or navigating the labyrinth of Medicaid billing changes, or, mapping the systemic failures that caused the boarding crisis we discussed earlier.
Right. And just to be super clear for everyone listening, we are impartially reporting this as a testament to the show's dedication to factual research. We are not taking a stance on any of these real-world issues.
Exactly. We are just highlighting their rigorous pursuit of real-world context. Their singular goal was forensic accuracy. They included these elements purely to capture the literal, unvarnished daily reality of an urban trauma center.
They were holding up a mirror to the system.
Yeah.
But to house all of this, the complex blocking, the medical procedures, the continuous flow, they couldn't just rent an abandoned office building or a standard TV soundstage.
No, they essentially had to forge a fully operational hospital from scratch. The physical set functions as the silent antagonist of the entire series.
It's a marvel of production design. They built it on a Warner Bros. Soundstage in L.A. The set spans 20,000 square feet, houses 25 patient beds, and costs $4 million to construct.
That's a massive investment.
Huge. And the lead production designer, Nina Ruscio, she actually drafted the blueprints and built this set before a single page of the script was finalized.
Which is crazy because that completely inverts the standard pipeline of television production. Normally, the narrative dictates the architecture.
Right. The writer decides 2 characters need to argue in a supply closet, so the art department builds a supply closet.
Exactly. But by constructing the hospital first, they utilized what they called a cup and curve architectural layout.
Right, where there are no hard corners, only sweeping, interconnected circular hallways. So the set actually dictated the flow of the action.
Yeah, the writers could literally walk the physical floorboards and write continuous, uninterrupted motion. The script would say, Robbie exits trauma 1, grabs a blood gas result at the central desk, and rounds the curve straight into bay 3 without ever breaking stride.
And to maintain that illusion of a bustling 360-degree environment, every single crew member, the Steadicam operators, the boom mic operators, the script supervisors, they all wore authentic green hospital scrubs.
It's such a brilliant contingency plan. Because if a camera operator accidentally catches their own reflection in a polished steel cabinet or a glass sliding door, the viewer's brain simply processes them as another anonymous surgeon moving through the ward.
The technical integration is staggering. They mapped over 300 computer-controlled lighting cues directly into the architectural grid. Because they're shooting long, continuous takes, they couldn't afford to yell, "cut," just to move a physical light stand.
Yeah, that would ruin the momentum.
As the 15 hours progress from the harsh glares of the afternoon into the fluorescent isolation of 3:00 a.m., and finally into the creeping blue light of dawn, the lighting team uses automated rigs to slowly drop the color temperature across the entire set.
Wow.
It physically alters the circadian rhythms of the actors on the floor.
Wow.
Now, knowing the set is that detailed, could you actually treat a real patient in there?
Honestly, yes. Medical experts who toured the facility confirmed that roughly 90% of the machinery is fully functional.
You're kidding.
I'm serious. If you walk into a random trauma bay and pull open a drawer, it isn't empty. You will find real, sterile gauze, functioning IV tubing, actual metal intubation blades. And because they filmed the show in strict continuity, shooting episode 1, then episode 2, perfectly in order, the actors lived inside that shifting light and utilized that real equipment.
So they were absorbing the genuine, compounding exhaustion of the shift.
Precisely. The physical tangibility of the set is extraordinary. But it's the invisible layer of post-production that elevates the tension into something almost unbearable. Specifically, the radical approach to sound design.
Oh man, the sound design. They made the massive creative gamble to use absolutely no musical score. 0.
Which in the landscape of network drama is a jarring omission. Think about standard medical dramas. When a patient's heart stops and the team rushes in, you immediately hear this pulsing, driving percussion to spike your adrenaline.
Right. Or when a family member receives devastating news, a mournful piano melody swells to tell you exactly how sad you should feel.
Exactly. But the Pitt aggressively refuses to manipulate the audience's emotions. They rely entirely on ambient Foley. The soundtrack is just the rhythmic, indifferent pinging of telemetry monitors, the muffled ringing of distant phones, and, the ragged sound of breathing.
It strips away all the safety nets of melodrama. There was a specific sequence involving the death of a patient named Roxy. Without a sweeping orchestral score to guide your grief or soften the blow, the moment plays out in stark, visceral silence.
It's so heavy.
The awkward, heavy quiet that fills the room after the chaotic medical intervention fails. It forces you to confront the brutal finality of the moment. It feels painfully intimate, as though you are standing uselessly in the corner of the room witnessing it.
It really makes the reality of the failure inescapable. Now, as deeply committed to realism as the production was, there were a few logistical hurdles where they had to rely on Hollywood trickery, mostly for legal and safety reasons.
Right, like the ultrasounds.
Yeah, the Warner Bros. Legal department strictly forbade the use of functioning ultrasound machines on the actors.
Which feels super counterintuitive, considering ultrasounds use harmless high-frequency sound waves. There is no radiation involved, so the physical risk is basically zero.
Right, but the legal liability was massive. The lawyers realized that if a medical consultant was performing a genuine ultrasound on an actor's real abdomen or heart for a scene, the machine might accidentally reveal a real, undiagnosed medical anomaly.
Like an asymptomatic tumor or something.
Exactly. The ethical and legal nightmare of discovering a life-altering illness during a take was just way too high. Consequently, every single ultrasound monitor you see on the show is playing pre-recorded, medically cleared playback footage.
That is a fascinating intersection of corporate liability and medical reality. And when the script called for highly invasive, gory procedures, they had to lean on the genius of their prop master, Rick Ladomade.
Oh, the dummy airway.
Yes, because modern intubation doesn't just involve looking down a throat. Doctors use video laryngoscopy. The blade has a tiny camera on the end that projects the vocal cords onto a wall monitor.
And obviously, you cannot shove a camera-equipped blade down a working actor's throat for a close-up.
No, absolutely not. So Ladomade engineered this highly complex, custom dummy airway. It was an artificial silicone throat that could be seamlessly attached to a medical dummy, fitted with synthetic tumors, or even pumped full of pressurized fake blood.
That's incredible.
Right. The camera goes down the artificial throat, projecting customized, horrific pathology onto the real monitors in the room without ever endangering the cast.
It allows the writers to introduce extreme, life-threatening internal trauma into the narrative while keeping the visual execution perfectly in line with modern tech.
Exactly. But amidst all of this high-stakes, cutting-edge medical simulation, my absolute favorite piece of behind-the-scenes trivia brings it all back to the craftsmanship of Nina Ruscio's set design.
Oh no, are you going to talk about the bathroom?
I have to. The aesthetic detailing of the hospital was so flawless, right down to the scuff marks on the floor, that the fake bathroom built on the soundstage looked entirely operational.
It looked too real.
It looked so convincing that an unaccustomed crew member actually used the prop toilet to go to the bathroom.
An absolute nightmare for the art department.
There was zero plumbing. It was just a porcelain bowl sitting on a wooden soundstage floor.
Oh, that is so unfortunate.
But honestly, if your set design is so immersive that someone forgets they are inside a Hollywood studio, that is the ultimate victory for the production team.
It really speaks to the totality of the illusion they created. From the sweeping architectural curves to the ambient hum of the monitors, every element was engineered to trap you inside the reality of that building.
Which leaves us with a really profound question about the nature of the show itself. You know, we typically engage with television as a vehicle for escapism. We want to detach from the compounding anxieties of our daily lives.
Right, we want to relax.
Yet the Pitt offers the exact opposite. It leans unflinchingly into real-world systemic stress, chronic burnout, and the friction of a critically underfunded healthcare infrastructure. So what does it say about our collective psychology that we find a strange comfort, or maybe connection, in watching dedicated professionals navigate the exact systemic failures we dread encountering in our real lives?
It's a great question.
Why does immersing ourselves in a chaotic, unscored 15-hour trauma shift make us feel so seen? It is a fascinating paradox to consider the next time you find yourself staring at the static clock in a waiting room. And that wraps our deep dive into The Pitt Season 1. If you enjoyed stepping into this intense world of life and death decisions, follow roll credits and share it with your fellow TV fans. And don't forget to drop a comment with what movie or show we should cover next, old or new. We'll be back soon with more trivia, more movie magic, and maybe a few more high-stakes moments.